All right. So today we're going to talk about harmful algal blooms in the what we're seeing here in the Southwest is increased dominance of cyanobacteria in southwestern lakes. I'm Rick Amalfi from Aquatic Consulting and Testing in Tempe, Arizona. So a lot of the material I'll be sharing with you today is from our experiences. I need to start by saying I'm old. I'm an old guy. So when I was in school back in the dark ages, cyanobacteria were blue-green algae. So probably throughout this presentation, you're going to hear me fumble and call them blue-green algae. Today, most people will call them cyanobacteria. So I actually looked it up and said, okay, how are they defining cyanobacteria? So they're microorganisms that structurally resemble bacteria, okay? They lack a nucleus. They don't have membrane-bound organelles, but they can conduct photosynthesis and contain chlorophyll. So that's the difference. A lot of it is based on size. The cyanobacteria tend to have very small cells compared to green and other algae divisions. They're less complex. Again, no organelles, no nucleus. Habitat can be similar. They both can be aquatic. Obviously, there's aquatic bacteria and there's aquatic algae. So those are the difference. So my general, please give me this general dispensation every time I say blue-green algae. So I thought I would start out with some of the common cyanobacteria. I almost did it right from the start. Some of the common cyanobacteria in the lakes here in Arizona. Probably one of the most common are Oscillatoria in Lyngbya. Now, again, when I went to school, Oscillatoria was the one on the left. As you notice, the filaments, they have very tiny compressed cells, but the sheath around the filament has no extensions compared to the one on the right. So the left is Oscillatoria, and according to my definition, the one on the right is Lyngbya. As you can see, the filament, the cell sheath extends beyond the trichome, beyond the cell filament, and also has breaks in it. So when you see these, I would call, so if you send me an algae sample, I'm going to call, if I see on the left, I'm going to call that Oscillatoria. The one on the right, I'm going to call that Lyngbya. One of our other huge culprits out here is Microcystis. So Microcystis is a colonial alga. It can have, like the one shown on the left, maybe a few hundred cells, and it can go to thousands of cells. These colonies can get so large that when you look in the water, you can actually see little specks in the water, and those are the colonies of the algae. Kind of looks like if you took some milk and poured it in a glass of water, it gets a grainy look to it. And of course, you can have a mess like shown on the right when it gets really out of hand. Anabaena and Anabaenopsis are also two common ones we see here. Anabaena is a filament. The irregular cell there in the center is a heterocyst that has the ability to fix atmospheric nitrogen. So any nitrogen dissolved in the water can be taken into that heterocyst and converted to nitrite, nitrate, and ammonia, which are nutrients for the algae. The Anabaenopsis has the heterocyst at the end of the filament. And that's really the difference between the two. Nodularia, also a nitrogen fixer with heterocysts. You can see the odd cell there in the photo on the right. Nodularia makes these kind of messy, intertwined masses of filaments. The blue-greens don't branch. They're all uniseriate, one filament, no branching. This one is a little more common in cooler parts of the state. You won't see it here in central Arizona very often, but you do see it in places like Flagstaff and Payson and up in the northern part of the state. One of my favorites here, Aphanizomenon. It has an interesting growth habit. The filaments all line up parallel to each other. Easy to identify under the microscope because of that feature. In the water, it's pretty interesting. We saw these in Watson Lake, and at first I had absolutely no idea what it was. It looked like light green threads floating in the water. Very long filaments, very thread-like. And this picture with the hand kind of gives you an idea what it looks like. And of course, if it really gets out of control, it looks like the far left picture there. But again, this one we see more in the cooler parts of the state than down here in the heat. One of my favorites, again, a more northern cyanobacterium, is Gloeotrichia. And it actually forms these puffballs, I'd call them, in the water. We had a lot of this again. Watson Lake had blooms of these, and they're pretty interesting. The close-up on the right shows you they have a basal heterocyst down at the bottom in these tufts in the center. Then they have what's called an aconite. And an aconite is an undifferentiated cell. It kind of doesn't know what it wants to be until the environmental conditions get unacceptable. The aconites will act pretty much as a spore. They will break off, and then they will essentially germinate into more vegetative cells and start another colony. Shizothrix and Planktothrix are some of the more uncommon ones. We don't see those nearly as often. Again, Shizothrix has a very thick coating around the filament, easy to spot. It has some false branching, what we call false branching. So even though you might think it's a branch coming off, it isn't. It's just in the mucilage next to it. So we call this false branching. Again, cooler climates, not so much in the heat here. Cylindrospermopsis, we do see in the southern part of the state, in the central part of the state, where temperatures are quite high, as well as up north. It is pretty easy to identify. I simply say if it looks like a spear, it's Cylindrospermopsis. The heterocyst is kind of that arrow shape or spear shape at the end of the filament, at one end of the filament. It can have an aconite either right under it or in these somewhere along the filament. Again, heterocyst is going to be able to fix nitrogen, and the aconite is going to act like a spore. And if conditions get bad, they can stay around and develop a new filament later on. So one of the things, I put complexity question mark down there because cyanobacteria, because they're bacteria, they're not supposed to be very complex. But I kind of look at it and go, wait a minute, they have heterocysts, okay, sites of nitrogen fixation. That's, to me, pretty advanced. And that really comes into play when you're trying to manage them, that they can make their own nitrogen. There's plenty of nitrogen in the atmosphere and dissolved in the water. So they can take that. So trying to eliminate nitrogen in a lake is pretty much a lost cause. They have the aconites, the undifferentiated cells that act as spores. So they can regrow after, let's say, a treatment or after some unfavorable climatic conditions. And they have mucilage. Everybody knows you pick up blue-green algae, they're pretty slimy. And that is...
Hey, Rick, can
yes.
Your screen seems to be clipped. It's not, can you shrink the size of your screen?
Let's see.
hit control and down on your mouse.
Much better.
On your screen, is it completely full?
Yeah, mine is.
I'm not sure. Anybody have any suggestions how to fix this?
Come on, you young guys ought to know how to do this.
Let's try let's try resharing the screen.
Okay. Let me do a new share. See what that does. Any difference there?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, it worked right the other night.
Yeah.
Go ahead and stop sharing and then just try and reshare it.
Stop sharing. Okay. Any difference?
It makes it too big, Rick.
I have no idea, Doug.
Why don't you go back to the go back to your PowerPoint and then maybe just go through the slides through there.
Now, are you seeing anything here?
I just see you.
You see me, okay.
Yeah, the main PowerPoint window. Instead of doing the slideshow, just go through the slides there.
Okay. What do you see in here?
Yeah, you can talk through that one.
Okay.
Just go through your slides.
Yeah, I'll just do it this way.
Okay.
Sorry about that, folks. Okay, we were talking about the survival mechanism. So we had the heterocysts, sites of nitrogen fixation. They had aconites, and then the mucilage. That slimy barrier is going to be very important when we're trying to do any kind of chemical management of the blue-greens. It covers and protects the cells from disruption, and which turn causes resistance to degradation, which includes penetration by a lot of chemicals. I threw this one in. I think I love the commercial that about the not do, so you can not do taxes. Forgot what company does that. Well, this is not cyanobacteria. We get a lot of calls on this algae. It's a green colony. It's Botryococcus. And it's really interesting because it can have colonies of hundreds of thousands of cells. And the interesting part is it can hook the colonies together with these cytoplasmic extensions. So what you end up with is this mass of colonies all hooked together. It makes the algae or cyanobacteria very buoyant, and it floats to the surface of the water. So you'd go, okay, well, a lot of algae does this, except Botryococcus has a full complement of pigments. So depending on the weather, water quality, it can be green, it can be yellow, it can be orange. We had a massive one in a lake here in central Arizona that the Botryococcus was a rust color, or it can be very, like this one here, or it could be actually almost dark brown in color. So this one is usually misunderstood as Cyanobacteria, or when it's yellow, I get a phone call, I think we have a golden algae bloom, the lake's turning yellow. No, it's Botryococcus. So we were talking about frequency of occurrence. What we're finding here, at least in Arizona, is that, especially the last couple of years, we're seeing more and more lakes dominated by blue-green algae. Ones that traditionally have had greens are now, it's converted over to blue-green dominance through most of the year. So not only do we see the blue-greens in more lakes, we see it for longer periods of time. Where we used to see it maybe for a month or two, now we're seeing it for 3, 4, 5 months. One of our big urban reservoirs here, Tempe Town Lake, that's 260-acre lake, it was dominated by blue-green algae, I'd say probably 6 or 8 months out of the year last year. A real issue, especially when it comes to recreation in the lake. So I mentioned issues. So what exactly are the issues we're talking about? Well, certainly if you get a Cyanobacteria bloom, aesthetics are going to take it in the chops. The lake is just not going to look very pretty. And here in central Arizona, putting a house on a lake is gold to the real estate market. Houses here, if they're on an urban lake, you can add minimally $150,000 to the price, sometimes more. So I often get a call, you've got to treat the lake, you got to treat the lake. My house is for sale. It looks horrible. I can't sell it with the lake looking like this. So that becomes a big issue. Recreation is another one, environment, and human health. So again, aesthetics. Obviously, the water color is going to change with a Cyanobacteria bloom. Water clarity is going to decrease significantly, especially if you have colonies or filaments in the water. And actually, you'll have odors. The shot on the right is not of the place I'm going to talk about, but it looks very similar. We had a lake in Chandler, Arizona. It's a reclaimed water lake. It had a Cyanobacteria bloom. It was Microcystis. It got so thick that it was actually in the summer here. So it was so hot that the algae was crusting on top of the bloom. So you had crusty white component. You had the green component of the Cyanobacteria. And then below that, you had decomposing organic matter from the dying filaments that had no light penetrating anymore. Well, most of you probably are familiar, either do or have had algaecide applications. One of the first things that will tell you on the label is break up the masses so you get better penetration. So we go out there and we go to break up these masses. What a mistake. What a stink. The dying, decomposing Cyanobacteria, it was horrible. So we had to kind of do oxidizers and then algaecide afterward.
Hey, Rick.
Yes.
Can you, for your presentation, just unminimize that screen? Hit the box in the middle, you're right, top right. There you go.
Okay. So recreational impacts are probably a big issue. Boating, fishing, and swimming. Obviously, I wouldn't want to probably go fishing if a lake or pond looked like this with a cyanobacteria bloom on it. I put obviously human contact here going swimming, it's an issue, but even dogs. A few years back, there is a park in Gilbert, Arizona, again in central Arizona here, suburb of Phoenix. They built a dog park with a pond in it. So the dogs in the summer can run out and go swimming. Sounds like a great idea until a cyanobacteria bloom. And then we got the phone calls. What's in the water? My dog is dead. So it does become a big issue, both for human health and for our pets. And no one likes to go to a lake that has these signs up on it, which is beach closed, swim or boat at your own risk. And of course, there's environmental impacts of the cyanobacteria. Indirectly, just like any other algae bloom, typically you get, I call a bloom and a bust. You get a big bloom, then the nutrients are depleted, or it actually begins to self-shade, and the bacteria or algae will die and start using up oxygen, and you can end up with a fish kill. Direct effects are the cyanobacteria. Many of them are toxin formers, and they can affect aquatic organisms, both the organisms in the lake and wildlife, birds and ducks that frequent the lake. So the human health impacts, most importantly, toxins. That is the biggest threat to us for the cyanobacteria. Modes of exposure. Obviously, you don't want to ingest it. If you get it on your skin, you can have a reaction to it. And one of the things I didn't think much about, and then thought about a lot more, the place where we were breaking up those clumps of the crusty Microcystis, was you can inhale it. Now, it's not a major pathway, but it is a pathway. You can actually inhale some of the toxins. So these are the toxin categories. Depending on what species of cyanobacteria are present, you can have hepatotoxins, they affect the liver. Neurotoxins affect the brain. Dermatotoxins, the skin. And endotoxins, which irritate your gastrointestinal tract. This slide, when I found this online, kind of scared me because being around this stuff quite frequently, you don't really realize all the things, the cyanobacteria, all the points of attack of cyanobacteria. So you've got the brain toxins, which are your anatoxins and your saxitoxins. They can interfere with lung function, things like cylindrospermopsin and microcystins and nodularians. They can impact your liver. The cylindrospermopsin, microcystins, you see some repeating here, and unfortunately they're ones we find, especially the microcystin and the microcystis all the time here in central Arizona. Kidneys, your immune system can be affected. Your stomach, small intestines, again, cylindrospermopsin, microcystin. Colon, same pair. And the gastrointestinal tract. So some more examples. I just wanted to put this here because I kind of went through this and said, okay, what's the risk here, at least in central Arizona? What do we find? So what are the hepatotoxin formers, the common ones that make the microcystins and the nodularians? Oh boy, we have microcystis here all the time. We get Anabaena. We don't get nostoc very often, but we do get Anabaenopsis frequently. Planktothrix, not so much. Neurotoxins. Aphanizomenon, well, northern Arizona, yes. Anabaena, yeah, we see it here. Oscillatoria, one of our key ones. Planktothrix, Cyanobacteria, and Lyngbya. So again, these genera are all well represented here in Arizona, and I would imagine probably in many places in California also. Dermatotoxins, Lyngbya, Shizothrix, and Oscillatoria. So these have the alkaloids that are going to make you itch and get rashes. And then I thought this one was a good one, the endotoxins, the lipopolysaccharides, all the cyanobacteria. So you don't want to drink this stuff. So a big question everywhere has been, how much is too much? How much cyanobacteria is a problem? How much toxin is a problem? So I kind of did a little scanning in, my gosh, you can get tables with all the states and all the countries, but I just picked out a few here of interest. World Health Organization, they do it by the number of cyanobacteria, toxin-forming cyanobacteria in the water. Less than 20, they consider low. Moderate risk is 20 to 100,000, and a high risk is greater than 100,000 cells per milliliter. In Canada, they use 100,000. In Arizona, their action level, state action level, is 20,000. And bless your hearts in California, you got to be the tough guys, 4,000 per milliliter. That's a low number. We'd be in deep trouble here in Arizona if that was our action level. So how much toxin? This was an issue here in one of our large urban lakes that had swimming events. People were going swimming in there. They had some big events scheduled, and we were starting to get very high counts. And what we did was a bunch of testing and came up with our site-specific plan. But here are just some examples. WHO says, World Health Organization says microcystin shouldn't be over in the range of 2 to 4 micrograms per liter. EPA has targeted microcystins at 8 micrograms per liter and cylindrospermopsin at 15. In California, again, you're the tough guys, microcystin at 0.8 micrograms per liter and cylindrospermopsin at 1 microgram per liter. So what we did is we took this information, let's say for this one particular place I'm talking about, we looked at the data, we looked at the results we were getting, and we established a 75,000 cell per mil action level, and then use the EPA guidance.
Yes.
Yes.
I believe it is, let me pull it up so I can be confident in my answer.
Okay.
Yeah, we won't have junior garden tryouts this week. Well, I'm almost positive it's another week away. Hang on, I'll put it up.
Okay. Are the numbers changing?
Junior lifeguards. Tryouts are May 6th, May 13th, and May 15th. We had one last weekend, And May 6th and 13th should be from 9 to 12. And then we have a Monday night one.
I think if somebody could mute Jim.
Okay.
It is a 100-yard swim. It's 50 yards out to the swim line and 50 yards back. That's 4 laps in the standard pool with lane.
Yeah, somebody's talking here. And
black stripe on
top. Yeah. Okay, I wasn't sure what that had to do with this, other than they were swimming.
I believe it's 2 minutes. Let's see.
Rick, somebody asked how to collect bloom samples for cell counts.
We did we did basically two different. We always did pairs of samples. We did an open water sample, a grab sample, just out in the middle of the lake, and then we also did a sample where obviously the Cyanobacteria was concentrating. So it was a Microcystis bloom. So the wind was concentrating it in several areas. So we would do an open water sample and then a sample right in the area where you know everything was concentrating. And what we typically found was that the open water, I think the first time we saw the bloom really got bad and we hit that 75,000, the open water was just over that microcystin, maybe it was something like 12 or 15 micrograms per liter. In the area of concentrated cells, it was hundreds of micrograms per liter. It was really high. So they had to do what they hate to do, is close it down to certainly no swimming events. And actually, I think they closed it to paddleboarding also. You could boat, but anything with high likelihood of contact was shut down. So we did some treatments, and I can discuss that in a few minutes here, and knock the levels to down to actually under 1 microgram per liter. So management. What causes cyanobacteria bloom? Well, more than likely, what's usually targeted is it's a nutrient condition. Too many nutrients in the water. So how do you remove nutrients? Almost impossible to remove nitrogen from a lake because it can absorb nitrogen from the atmosphere, or a lot of the cyanobacteria can fix that nitrogen in the water and in the atmosphere to nitrites, nitrates, and ammonia. So you target phosphorus. So what can remove phosphorus? Well, the long age-old one is using alum, aluminum sulfate. There are a number of products now that are alum substitutes. Might be familiar. I'm not promoting anything here. We don't sell anything. But one that comes to mind right away is Phoslock, which I believe is a clay product that binds the phosphorus. And I actually just got a message from a vendor this morning that another alum substitute is on the market, and they're going to start selling it. So that is one thing you can do. Another thing you can do, light inhibition, the use of aquatic dyes. There are a ton of dyes. Go on the internet. There are a ton of products. I believe the only 2 products that are actually EPA registered are Aquashade and Admiral. Doug, you remember? Is there another one?
Those are the only ones I know.
Those are the ones I can think of. So because like one of the lakes that has all these events is in the waters of the US, to keep everything above board for our pesticide general permit, we don't like to use non-EPA registered products in the water. So we go to one of those products if we were to add dye. We don't, because it's 260 acres with an average depth of over 10 feet. I think a dye application would be over $30,000 just for the materials. So we don't do it there, but much smaller lakes, we use dye quite a bit just to cut out the light. And the two EPA registered products actually have dyes that compete for those wavelengths of light that are used in photosynthesis. So the dyes they put in there will absorb and ultimately reduce the photosynthetic available radiation by about 30%. It's not a huge number, but 30% is better than nothing. And especially here in Arizona, where we have intense sunlight during the summer, anything helps. Probably the most commonly used are algaecides. The copper complexes are used the most. We tend not to use the non-chelated coppers because we have such high hardness in our waters here. A 200 hardness here is considered low. We have some lakes that have hardness values of 500 and 600. And if you use a non-chelated copper, you'll put it in the water and you'll see it just turn very light, almost a white color, as the copper is becoming copper carbonate and sinking to the bottom of the lake. So we use chelated coppers, and also because the cyanobacteria have a mucilage, which interferes with the penetration of the copper into the cells, we always use a surfactant. So we either buy a product containing a surfactant or add a surfactant to it to basically dissolve that mucilage so the copper has a better chance of entering into the cells. Other things that are commonly used and very effective are the alkylamine salts of endothal. That is your hydrothol, trying to think, Teton, I think is another name. Great product, but not so great if you have fish. You have to be extremely careful if fish are in the lake, if you have a particular lake, because fish are extremely sensitive to it, and you don't want to be killing fish because then you'll just have another problem on hand. The third one are the sodium carbonate peroxyhydrates. Those are your, I'm trying to think of some of the names of those. Green cleans, the phycomycin, what's the other one? PAC, what is it, PAC?
PAC 27.
PAC 27. They're basically the granular peroxides. We have had excellent results using those for filamentous cyanobacteria. Seem to work really well. The peroxide attacks and disintegrates the cell right away, and you get a pretty good kill. We have had far less luck using it for colonies and other suspended forms of blue-greens. Just doesn't seem to do nearly as well on the colonies in Cyanobacteria unicells. And finally, you've got biological products. Yes.
Rick,
Yes.
Somebody's asking if the sodium carbonate peroxyhydrate slices the cells, and if it's used in drinking water reservoirs.
I can't say I absolutely know the answer. I would assume they would. It's an oxidizer. I would assume it would break it down. The question is whether the peroxide then alters the toxin. And I don't know the answer to that question. But certainly, yes, in terms of the copper, we know the copper lyses the cells. People will often ask, Well, isn't that a bad thing then? You can have a major toxin release. Yes, it is bad. And matter of fact, last time I saw him, I asked John Rogers, Dr. John Rogers from Clemson. He is heavily involved with the EPA HAB team. He may actually be the chair. And he's kind of the go-to guy. He's the expert here in the United States. And he said, you know, what you can't do is nothing. If you kill them, you may release some toxin, but then they're dead and they aren't going to release again and again and again. So treat it, hope for the best, and move on. So that's kind of the approach here. But the sodium carbonate peroxyhydrate, I'm not sure whether the chemical, I feel pretty confident it's going to lyse the cells because it really disintegrates them with very quickly. But I'm not sure what the effect of the peroxide is on the toxin itself. I hope that answers the best I can your question. The final product are biologicals, and I'm going to express some personal opinions here. You may or may not agree. We have not had exceedingly good results using bacteria products and enzymes to take care of just about any type of algae. I'm not saying it doesn't work. I think it does work in some cases, but I think it has to be the right case. It has to be the right environment. If you think about it, bacteria are pretty persnickety. They like certain things. And the manufacturers that make these products, they blend bacteria, and they say, well, these are all, it's not genetically engineered. These are naturally occurring bacteria. So I guess the first question I ask always is, well, if they're naturally occurring bacteria, why aren't they naturally occurring in the lake? If they're supposed to be good, why aren't they there if they're naturally occurring and can live in that environment? And the second one is, it seems unlikely that you could come up with a bacteria blend that is going to work in every environment, from New Hampshire to Southern Arizona to Northern California to North Dakota. It's just highly unlikely that the bacteria will work, will grow as well in all those environments. So I think what you have is mixed results. You could have great results in one place and terrible results in another, just depending on the environment you're putting the bacteria. So I know NALMS has resisted, supporting the use of bacteria products for a number of years. I don't know if that's changed recently, but these are the questions about the bacteria. Will it hurt anything? Probably very unlikely. Worth a try, depends what your budget can bear and what you're willing to do. That's what I tell my clients, because a lot of them say, well, why don't we use this bacteria? I saw this bacteria product on the internet, and it won't harm the fish and it's better for the environment. And I always tell them, I've had mixed success. If I'm willing to put it in, if you want to pay for it. Also, results tend to occur at a much slower rate using bacteria products. And usually, if you have a cyanobacteria bloom, and especially in a place where people are swimming or doing recreational activities, they want it gone. They want it gone fast. And finally, we have people ask me, and I had a colleague who was doing a bunch of data review to see if there was any impact of nutrient loading and golden algae presence to cyanobacteria. Well, we found very little correlation to nutrient loading. The golden algae appeared in reclaimed water lakes, to even lakes that were using treated wastewater recharged into the aquifer and pumped out. literally in San Antonio, that would be called drinking water. And we had golden algae and cyanobacteria. And we found no correlation of the golden algae to presence of cyanobacteria. There was some hope that maybe the cyanobacteria would exclude golden algae, but it doesn't seem to work that way. We get golden algae in the presence of cyanobacteria. So I believe that is my last slide. I apologize for my lack of computer skills to get this, but I hope some of this was of value.
Does anybody have any questions for Rick?
Hi, yes, this is Ann. I have a question about addition of copper and aluminum. Does that cause water quality problems separate from the cyanobacteria?
Yeah, are you talking in together or just?
Oh, separately, either
separately?
one of them.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, copper has been used for a long, long time. One of the things, you know, we see with the cyanobacteria, we usually have to go at a slightly higher concentration because of the mucilage. And here in Arizona, because of the hard water, we have to overcome. We know we're going to lose some of that copper effectiveness because some of the copper is going to ultimately bind with the carbonates in the water. But we have had really no issues with the copper. We don't have extremely low copper standards here. I know, well, I would assume in California, they're probably much lower than here because I know there's big push not to use copper there. So we have never had an issue. Generally, the copper stays in the water here for less than a week. So a week later, you come out and the copper levels are back to normal. So efficacy is for probably a couple days here, doing most of its damage probably in the first few hours of treatment. So we have not had issues with the copper as far as exceeding a standard, a water quality standard, or causing any other harm to fish or any other organisms. Alum, we have not done very many alum treatments, so I really can't speak to that question very well. The issues here for us are usually our pHs of our lakes are usually so high that just a straight alum treatment isn't going to work. We're going to have to do something to bring the pH down for the alum to be effective. And also that many of our lakes that we work on here are small. They're quite small. Most urban lakes are 5 to 10 acres. We have a few 50-acre lakes, and we have the one big 260-acre lake. So it's really difficult to do an alum application in a small reservoir because of just the logistics of getting the material. Liquid alum, you're paying a lot for water. It's hard to get on a boat. They don't have docks. They don't have cranes to get the alum on barges or anything like that. So we don't do a lot of alum applications here. So I'm sorry, that part I'm really, but maybe somebody else in the audience has experience.
No.
No? Okay.
Rick, someone's asking, does lake size and depth change treatment options?
Usually not. I think we tend to go with the same principle. Generally, our rule of thumb here is most of our lakes have about 1 meter light penetration. That's kind of the standard depth. Some more, some significantly less. So what we try to do is base our applications on acres times 3 feet. So if we've got a 20-acre lake, we will calculate our dosage based on 60 acre-feet of treatment, divided in half, because again, we don't want to treat more than half the lake at a time to protect against an oxygen crash. So that's kind of our rule of thumb. So size hasn't really mattered as far as our applications. It's all about logistics and how to get the chemical in. But so far we've figured out ways to do it from the small lakes up to 260 acres.
Okay. Rick, a few more questions here, but you can stop sharing your screen now.
Yep.
Someone's asking about, is there any long-term treatments to prevent blooms during the year?
Okay, Doug, can you say that one more time? Because you went into
Are
slow-mo.
there any long-term treatments to prevent blooms during the year?
All right, am I breaking up or can you hear me okay?
I'll do one. Are there any long-term treatments to prevent blooms during the year?
Not that I am aware. Interestingly, I was just talking to another lake manager yesterday, and we were talking about the days when we could use simazine. Simazine was a product that you could use probably twice a year and prevent most of your algae blooms. It was pulled from the market probably 20, 25 years ago. Not that there was anything wrong with it. It was that the company just said they weren't spending the millions of dollars to get re-registered with the EPA for a product that the aquatic portion of their market was so small that it wasn't worth the money to do it. So no, what you could do is you could try to do some proactive applications. We do that for some clients who have had habitual golden algae issues. We go out there and on a rotation about every other week, do half of the lake. With golden algae is very susceptible to copper. So you're doing a 0.2 part per million application. So what we do is during the peak golden algae period, every other week we treat half the lake. I guess that could work for the cyanobacteria as well. It's a lot of work and it's a cost, but I don't see why that wouldn't work for that that organism as well.
Okay, Rick. How many years do you get out of a phoslock or alum treatment?
Well, if I read the literature correctly, you should get at least 5 years out of an alum treatment. And phoslock is supposed to be at least the same or better, but we have only honestly used it in one application and it didn't work very well. And I understand that the phoslock folks have reformulated it and they said it will improve how well it works. So that's the best answer I can give you right now. I'd say at least 5 years for alum and still kind of unknown for phoslock.
Okay. What conditions are warning signs for a bloom and when do you intervene?
We do at least monthly cell counts. So if we see potentially toxin forming cyanobacteria, and we've used that 75,000 cells per mil as our action level, then we would go to a client and say, we think we need to do a preventive algaecide application. So we base it on cell counts. Cell counts you can do, they're much cheaper than grabbing toxin samples. Also, it gives you a little bit of early warning that they're already there, even though they might not be producing toxins. And that's always the problem. You just don't know what exactly is going to trigger that organism to produce toxin.
Okay, do you ever look at benthic toxin production? And if so, how do you treat them?
No, I have not. That is a very interesting comment that I'd be interested to see if anybody has worked on that. Because true, we have some lakes here that grow Lyngbya and Oscillatoria in masses on the lake bottoms. And good point, very good point, that I am not aware of anybody looking into what they could be releasing, because we would miss them in a plankton sample.
Okay. Do treatments for any specific cyanobacteria require more product than others due to the mucilage layer?
Yes, Doug, you know this one, Lyngbya especially. The more mucilage, the more product you're going to have to use. And what Doug came up with when he was with our company, Doug came up with a quite an interesting concoction that worked well. And it was specifically for Lyngbya. That seems to be the toughest to kill. And it was a combination of a couple copper algaecides, one with really designed for streams, Cleargate, has a very high surfactant concentration. So it was copper, it was a lot of surfactant and some diquat, right? Mm-hmm. And some diquat in there as a contact herbicide. And that seemed applied directly on, and that was used a lot on where it was growing on the bottom, seemed to do pretty well and break it up. So yes, depending on what's out there, as you recall, something like Planktothrix doesn't have a lot of mucilage. That probably could, you could treat that with a lower concentration than something with a very, very heavy mucilage, like I believe that was the Shizothrix, had the much heavier mucilage around it. So yeah, we vary it. And I can't say there's an exact formula on how to determine it. There is some art to picking the concentration. Obviously, you want to go as high as you need to go, but you don't want to go overboard because you do want to protect the fisheries.
Okay, Rick, someone's asking, are cell counts done as individual cells or as filaments?
I do them as individual cells. So it is not, it's not as precise as it might be, but I think the cell counts actually give you a better idea what's going on than natural units. A lot of places count algae by natural units. So a filament that has 200 cells in it is 1 unit. Well, I want to know the difference between a filament that has 200 cells and a filament that has 10. So we actually do cell counts, and we try to estimate as close as we can how many cells are in the unit. Do I sit there and count every cell? No, I don't. But I can look at the cells, see the size, count a couple of them, and then pretty much know, with micrometers, how many cells are in the other filament. I know a cell so long is going to have about 100 cells in it. Every time I see one that size, I'm going to count that as 100. It's not perfect, but it's certainly close enough to give us an idea of what's going on in our lake. I lost you, Doug.
One more question here. It says Oscillatoria and Lyngbya are confusing sometimes. Is there a good way to tell them apart in an identification?
Well, again, I use that sheath. If the sheath, the outer layer, extends beyond the end of the filament or trichome, it's Lyngbya. If it just ends at the end of the filament, it's Oscillatoria. But as we usually say, we end up treating it very similarly. You know, back when I was in school, they debated whether they were even two separate species, or genera rather.
So, okay, well, thank you, everybody. I don't see any more questions coming in. This has been recorded and will be uploaded to the comms website, and then what other resources they decide to put it on. Thank you, Rick. Thank you for all the information.
You're welcome.
And everyone have a good day. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Okay. Good.
Thanks for helping.
Yep, you're welcome. Thank you. Bye.
Yep, bye.